With regard to this proceeding, basically there are 4 elements that I have to receive information regarding. Everybody, let's get out of here.
Now, watch the electricity line. Watch the light. Watch the light. Out the back door. All the way to your right. Hurry.
This is a special report.
There was what was apparently, seems to be some kind of explosion downtown at a federal office building.
If you are anywhere downtown, you probably heard it and felt it. And there has been some kind of explosion in downtown Oklahoma City.
Wow.
Look at that shot.
Holy
It is
cow.
absolutely incredible. The side of the federal building has been blown off. Jesse?
About a third of the building has been blown away.
Some sort of explosion has ripped through the Alfred Murrow building in downtown Oklahoma City. That is the federal building that houses many federal offices. And about a third, the northern third of the building is gone.
It is a chaotic scene down there right now, folks.
There's hundreds of people that are injured.
The devastation again in downtown Oklahoma City is absolutely incredible.
I have declared an emergency in Oklahoma City.
There was a bombing at a federal building in downtown Oklahoma City today.
An apparent car bomb ripped the front off a federal office building and spread injuries and damage for blocks.
The federal office building attacked held 550 employees today, as well as a daycare center. Officials on the scene have said the explosion appeared to be caused by a car bomb.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil.
I had just sat down on one of the benches in the courtroom when I felt the explosion more so than heard it. There was a sound, but it felt almost like somebody bumping your car from the rear when you're sitting in it. It was just kind of a jolt.
There's bulletproof windows in the governor's office. There was a noticeable percussion boom against the building, and I thought maybe an ammunition dump at Tinker Air Force Base blew up.
And at 9:02, I had just turned around and kind of reared back in my chair. My office, you understand, was on the far south wall of the Murrah building. I leaned back in my chair, and all of a sudden I saw everything just going up into the air. And I could see clear through the building instantly on the north side, and you see the parking lot. And I could see fire.
If you've ever seen an implosion, of a building, at first it's dust that goes up. And that's kind of what I remember rather than smoke. I remember that dust.
I left my wife and my in-laws there in front of the courthouse, knowing that they were safe at that point. And I ran over to the Murrow building.
Going down Broadway, it was literally raining glass on the police cars. It sounded like a rainstorm. There was that much glass coming down out of the sky. The roadways looked like the scene after a tornado. I mean, there was no driving any further.
The sidewalks were all covered in glass. Alarms were going off in all the buildings because, it had blown out the windows. It was just people all around. Pretty sure there were helicopters flying over by that point, sirens. It was just an incredible scene.
What was only seconds, I had no guess of time what it was. And so I started hollering at these girls that had been in the office with me. And I said, "Where'd y'all go? Why did you leave me in here?" And I later learned that all 7 floors from up above had fallen right down and took all of them down into this area that they ended up calling the pit. All of them died that day, and I was the only one in my office that had made it out.
I basically was there so fast that I'd pretty much beat everybody coming out of the YMCA building. That I'd pulled up right in the front door and people just started pouring out blood all over. I was grabbing, I remember papers, I was grabbing whatever, because some of these little kids coming out of the YMCA building, they were bleeding really bad.
Watch out here!
And I had nothing. You know, I felt helpless. I felt really, truly helpless. I had no bandages, I had nothing. So I was grabbing like sheets of paper and folding them together and putting them on their heads and where they were bleeding, and I was grabbing somebody else and said, put pressure here and throw them in this car and go with them to the hospital.
I walked around to the east side of the building, or ran around to the east side of the building, and I saw people pouring out of the one door that was on the east side, and they were just coming out of there as fast as they could. It was like ants out of an anthill.
I could see the smoke was coming from downtown, and I could see it was near the cathedral. So I jumped back in the car and came down, and I guess it was a couple of minutes after the blast, and came in, and everything had changed from what it had been before.
I could tell immediately it was where Susie worked. Now, I had no idea whether she was at work or whether she was injured or anything else, but the director at the time threw me a couple of 2-meter radios and said, you need to get down there.
The first series of pictures I shot, one was a piece of metal that was laying across the car in front of this apartment complex. And I thought, you know, this is something you'd see in a tornado, and moved on and started shooting pictures as I got closer and closer to the building.
I started making my way further west on 5th Street and got in front of the Murrah building. And when I saw the crater, I knew it was a bomb.
I looked at the building and I could see, I mean, what I was looking at was rebar hanging down.
When I came into the building, it looked like one of these World War II movies, you know, where there's dust in the air and the shafts of light are coming into these bombed church buildings. And that's what it was when I came in there. Instead of seeing the stained glass, you saw just light and dust.
Everything was on fire. All the cars were on fire. The building, of course, had been blasted away. And I noticed a drivetrain in the road that had been circled with a yellow marker. And I said, we got them. I remember seeing that thing, and I said, there'll be a confidential VIN number on that, and we can find out what the truck was. Well, I assumed from the start it was a criminal event.
As we got about right here, we could start seeing people who were injured, and parts of their clothing had been blown off. A lot of them didn't have their shoes. Some had blood on them. Most all of them had the dust from the scene.
There's no other way to explain it. It's mass chaos. So many people are wounded, so many people are hurt, there's so much damage. You can't get fire trucks in, you can't get ambulances in. All you're trying to do is get people out and away from all that damage, all that debris, all the fallen building, to get them help. And there's just hundreds of them and just a few officers. And you're just trying to maintain whatever type of control that you can.
I stood just down the street here with some people who worked in the building who had made it out, and one thing I remember is I remember them standing there with 2 pieces of paper, and they were just scrap pieces of paper that they'd found and they had written on, and one had a list of the people in their office who they knew had gotten out, and the other was the ones that they hadn't found yet.
Everything was happening, and we didn't start to get details until people started running in, and there were people coming from the explosion site, and they were looking for first aid material.
There was just such a feeling of being overwhelmed because there were so many people coming out with such horrific injuries. As the entryway started to clear, I made my way inside of the building. And I remember it was like the heaviest rainstorm I had ever seen on the inside of that building because pipes had burst, sprinklers were still going off. There was just water everywhere. It was just falling from the ceiling, and you could hardly see anything in there.
There was a gentleman named Raymond Washburn, and Raymond worked in the building, and Raymond was blind, and he had concession in the buildings. He had on one of the floors, and you know, he told me that he went in that day, and like any other day, he went to the counter, and then he went over and he put his cane against the wall, and then went back to the counter. Well, he said after it blew, you know, neither the wall was there nor the cane. But he gave me a quote, something to the effect of, that was the one day in his life he was glad that he could not see. What is stronger than that statement?
There was a gentleman on the corner standing there. It was one of my first things I remember and one of my most vivid pictures of the bombing that morning in my mind. He was standing there. He was in a white shirt, but it was filthy and dirty and bloody, and his shoes were missing, and it was obvious he had been in the Murrah building or nearby, and he was looking up at the rubble, and he was just going, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And I often thought I should have gone and tried to talk to him, but I didn't. Later, I did see some of the babies who had died in the bombing, and I think his image stuck out to me because he was still suffering, and I felt like those babies were at peace.
Within the hour, we started receiving some people. Gave us time to be ready because we knew we'd be getting somebody. We didn't know if it'd just be adults or kids. You never know the scenario, so the whole trauma system was activated.
By the afternoon, there really weren't any injured being pulled from the site. You know, the last person who was alive that was out of the rubble was the night of the 19th. So.
And I think most of the injured had already been taken to the hospital even before
Right.
I arrived at St. Anthony's.
Before I even arrived, they went with pickups. They went in private vehicles. They either, if they were badly injured, they had triage right there at the corner, which I checked the triage areas and didn't see her there anywhere.
Once we found out there was a daycare involved, so we knew how many kids. And so that was hard for me to go out and say, every 15 minutes there's no new ones. And you could just see the energy drain, and that's a vivid memory I have that I have to work with.
It did not dawn on me when we walked into St. Anthony's. I remember it now, but it didn't register to me. There are all these empty gurneys lined up.
At first, oh wow, we're all set up, but then it got the feeling that you realize they're waiting there, and there are no ambulances. The sirens have stopped. It was before cell phones, and that was one of the hardest things, was the communication. Everybody wanted to communicate something to someone.
Our mom, she had had vehicle problems that morning, and she was actually en route to go teach veterinary students at Oklahoma State about the accreditation process for USDA. And she had stopped in to change vehicles at the Murrah building. And so when I knew that happened, I tried calling, and there was no phone service at that time.
Until my dad had Rosalind with him and came to pick me up from school, which was not typical for the day. So you of course knew that something was not good or something was different than our normal schedule. And then I think we went to pick Chelsea up after that.
And I actually remember feeling excited because they called me to the office and they're like, "Oh, you're leaving." So I was like, "Yes, I'm leaving school, like get to go home." And then whenever I saw that my dad and sisters were there, I was like, something's weird, something's not right. And as a little kid, you don't understand the gravity of the situation.
I was kind of on a dual mission. I would do my job, and that's fine, but I was constantly looking at every person with blonde hair, anybody I could see, please let me be the bearer of good news. Let me, tell them everything's okay. And as the day went on, it just seemed less and less likely.
I was just on a mission. I mean, I had blinders on. I thought, it's just a matter I'm going to find her. And like Albert said, I looked for, and not only downtown at the Family Assistance Center, I saw every blonde-haired woman there. I would run up to them and look at them.
And I think for us, one of the main images that's replayed over and over again is Dr. Espy, who's the man in the camel coat. That was my mom's boss. And so him coming out, we knew that there was potentially still hope there.
But we certainly, I think, even though it took a while to get notice, knowing our mom, she would have been home if she was okay.
It didn't get to me. I had no idea of actually the whole scope of that until late in the afternoon. And my wife was in Dallas, and she was down there. She was a nurse, and she was there at a conference, and she heard about it and got on a plane back to Oklahoma City. And until she appeared, and I saw in her face, look in her eyes, and it's the first time I actually realized what that full scope of this was.
So I came home and saw the kids for a little while, and told Donald a little bit about what had happened, without divulging too much. And I just told him that, I got to go back and find your Aunt Susie, so I got to go back. And he was only 6. And so in a 6-year-old mind, he tried to help me find a way to do that. So he started coming up with ideas on how to find her, which was, I think, a good thing.
Even at a young age, I understood the magnitude that something happened, to the point that I started to come up with ideas on remedies to pull people out or help people, whether it be a bulldozer or Superman or whatever. But it was the idea that something terrible had happened and something needed to be done. Now that was from a 6-year-old's point.
I remember my dad saying, whatever happens, it's really going to change our lives. So.
The first incident, the next morning, my wife and I went down there, and there was a firefighter coming up the street. And it was not an Oklahoma City firefighter. I could tell that there was not the same uniform. And he looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the governor of Oklahoma." And he, I thought his natural reaction would be, "Boy, nice to meet you, sure, thanks." And he went on, but he didn't. He walked up to me and he took his finger and he stuck it in my chest and he pounded my chest. He said, "Will you find out who did this? Because the only thing I pulled from that rubber was a child's finger and an American flag."
It's taken several years to realize that even though I never covered anything like this, I did see 168 people die instantly that morning. And I put it out of my mind at that time because we didn't know the figure, for one thing. But as a journalist, you always want to be involved in the big story, as long as the big story is somewhere else and not in your own backyard. And that's what this was. It was a big story in our backyard.
But it took a long time for us to receive official notification that we had lost her.
A lot of people had to wait longer than we even did. But you would ask yourself, you want to hold out hope but from Wednesday to Saturday is a long time. And we all knew that, but you didn't dare start talking about, should we plan a funeral, because that you've given up at that point. And they said, introduce, or is this something about, is this you with the family of Susan Farrow, and this is the medical examiner's office? And I thought, this is our phone call. I said, could you hold, please? And I went back, and Mom and Dad were in the back of the house, and I said, they were somewhere in the house, and I said, you all need to pick up the phone. And that was it. And I mean, that was confirmation, and it was just horrible.
From then on, we had emergency board meetings every day to inform everybody whose bodies had been located, when the funerals were going to be, and that kind of thing. It was extremely difficult days. Sometimes there were 3 funerals to try to go to.
For days, people had their headlights on, like you would see in a funeral procession. And, I just remember crying, going home, because it was, they were running their headlights just like they were going to a funeral procession of someone they'd known and loved, because these were their neighbors.
One of my dear friends drove me to Chandler. That's when I saw the headlights. Everyone had their headlights on. And I can't tell you what that did to me. I mean, and people's batteries were running down because they'd stopped their car, didn't realize their headlights were on, because it was encouraged for everyone to have their headlights on for those who were missing, those who were died, those who they were looking for because of what had happened. I was speechless when I saw that.
I never read a newspaper or watched television for 2 weeks probably, because we were all of us were focused on doing what we could to help people who were hurt and killed, and their families were terribly suffering as a result.
As this turned into recovery effort, went from especially rescue to recovery, the kind of work and I'd say the emotional strain increased on searches, and the timing went. I mean, this went on days and days, and our little garden there, was one of the places where some of the rescue workers would come, and they'd have a chance to kind of regroup their souls.
Have you ever been involved in anything even remotely like this before?
I was in Kuwait during the war, and Saudi, and I saw stuff like that building there, but you kind of expect it there, you don't expect it here.
There's a condition called compassion fatigue that healthcare workers can get into, and even media, as a matter of fact. And that's because of secondary trauma. In other words, you're covering an event, you can actually start taking that in because you care. The more you care, the more susceptible you are.
I didn't handle me very well. The Oklahoman, the day of, offered counseling, and in all the days after that. And I always thought, why would I want to do that? Because we worked every day. I said, why would I want to do that? I'll do that when we're done with this. Well, it's 20 years later and we're not done with this.
The ones that survived, that were able to come back to work, they needed a lot of, how are you today? And I spent an awful lot of time hugging them, and because they lost their dearest friends, and we were a family, and somehow or other we got through it, but I truly believe that the hugs and the compassion that we showed each other got us through it. But the days were hard sometimes, but we were stronger than we thought we were, and with the credit unions and the community and so many showed us so much love and compassion that that we needed at that time, that we got through it. We got through it.
I know I needed some counseling later on, and I actually ended up at Garden Ridge one night at, it was midnight. I don't know how I got there or what was going on or anything, and I decided, okay, I need some help here. So I secretly went and got help. I wouldn't file it with my insurance because I didn't want anyone to know. I went in the back door of the counselor's office because I didn't want anyone to know. And but as time went on, I talked about it, and I think that that if I help someone else that's a journalist, then I'm glad I was able to do that.
I don't know how we did it. The first morning we opened up for business, there was probably 500 members of the credit union that, you know, some of them that had been housed in the Myrtle building. Nobody had anything to do. And in fact, everything in Oklahoma City stopped. Everybody stopped when that happened. So there was about 500, some of them with bandages on them, and standing there because they wanted to be together. And they would come every day and to see how, you know, my little survivors were. There was only 7 of them, and some of them hadn't been there that worked that day.
It was like the entire city stopped. And, you know, it was like every person in Oklahoma City, they stopped, you know, and had the news on.
Our dad thought it was really important for us to continue with, you know, and continue with life. And that's really been, even from the immediate incident, that's really been a defining kind of trait as we've gone along. Otherwise, you sit glued to the TV and you can only watch so much over and over again.
I remember, of course, everyone tried to kind of bubble wrap you from the world a little bit, both friends and teachers and those kind of things. And that was, I think the worst thing was, you know, when would someone say, "How are you doing?" You know, and you want to say, "How, you know, I'm 13 years old, how would you like me to respond to that question?" I mean, that was the tough thing to get back out with society and with everyone, because people wanted you to understand that they cared about you and, you know, their empathy and their sympathy, but also it almost made you feel, you know, because when you're upset, kind of the last thing you want anyone to do is ask you how you're doing.
What I remember, one of the things I remember very vividly is when I returned back to school, and in my seat, instead of where I would normally sit, there was sitting a teddy bear. And every kid in my class and all the teachers, and I think even throughout the school, everybody had given a hug to the bear. So they gave me the bear, and any time that I felt sad or needed comforting, I could hug, and I'd be getting a hug from hundreds of people. And I don't know why, but it just really means a lot when you know that so many people care about you. And my friends, even though they didn't understand.
The kids being younger, okay, doesn't necessarily mean it's a lot better, but it's a little better because they're concerned about the next thing.
My mom kind of kept me away from it as much as she could, not directly exposing me to what I've been through, but I always knew that something was going on, and I guess over the years I just pieced together what I could from like her different parts of interviews. I'd always be in the next room listening. A lot of times I each time learning more and understanding more of what she was talking about. Remember the first thing I wanted to do was go to recess, and I enjoyed it. First time, it was everything I expected it to be. Couldn't wait. I was sad that it was only for like about an hour. I wanted to go back outside. Then when I got my trach out, one of the main things I wanted to do was swim. Because of course with the trach I couldn't go underwater or anything. And immediately, not a month afterwards, I was in the pool, just having a good time. There's many other things on the list, and the next one is college for me.
You never quit wanting to do something for her, in her memory. There's benches around, and Girl Scouts got a good contribution from friends and all of us. And you appreciate everything that's done.
It is hard when, like, constantly I'll hear stories, you know, from my parents or my grandparents say, wow, that was a Susie moment, or wow, you remind me so much of her.
Oh, how sweet!
Like, things I'll wear, things I'll do, or how stubborn I can be sometimes, you know, and it is hard. It is hard knowing that there is this person that I have so much in common with that I was never able to get to know.
There's not a day goes by that I don't think of one or more of them. You know, my house is full with mementos and gifts that they brought me throughout the years.
A counselor once told me that you have body memories. Your body remembers, you know, what your mind processed in a traumatic event, and that sometimes your body reacts, sometimes in similar fashion. And I think that's really true. And yeah, you do. You just start getting kind of tense. And sometimes it's funny. I'll just almost not feel well, and I'll have to think, I wonder what's wrong. And I'm like, it's April.
Cindy knows this. I mean, you can pretty much mark it, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before the anniversary. I just kind of get in this. I kind of get in a mood.
When I start getting into that day, I don't remember with my head, I remember with the members of my body. I mean, I start feeling it here, I start feeling it here, I start feeling it in my eyes. It's like a feeling that's like a thunderstorm is about to break out and it's going to come just pouring out of you.
When I come down here, I've covered the remembrance ceremony several times. And when I come down here, even during prayer, I'll definitely bow my head and I'll definitely pray, but I don't close my eyes. Because if I close my eyes, it seems like I see those things again.
I constantly deal with that day every day of my life, so it's never really pushed to the side. I always am thankful that I was able to make it through that day. And what I take from it whenever I think about it is that God had a plan for me to survive that day. And why I'm at college is to try to figure out what that plan is.
I certainly don't think that the bombing has gone away for people. I think it will be here for generations and generations. For myself, I don't think it'll ever go away. It certainly changed my life.
The survivors that I've talked to and have shared their stories with me, that's part of their healing process. Every time they tell it, it becomes not easier, but it becomes part of their healing. It might even become more difficult every time they tell it, but they tell it in order and share it in order to enter into that healing process. And so I think more opportunities for people to share their stories, more opportunities for those of us who weren't here to listen would be a great exchange, not only for us to keep alive what happened that day, but also to build on that groundswell of that Oklahoma spirit of coming together to reach out to each other.
I asked a little Holocaust survivor a few years after that. I said, after her talk, she'd been a child at the time, obviously, and I said, when did you quit telling your story? And she said, as long as you are touching lives, keep telling your story. So I keep that in mind when I'm asked to talk.
It's not something I like to talk about, but I hope it's always something I will talk about.
I mean, it was a full-service evil attack on innocent men and women. And how does anybody anticipate that, and how does anybody stop it unless someone tells someone else? And hopefully that will be the case in the future if anybody thinks of such a thing.
I would assume 168 people would be termed a massacre. And this man was one of our own citizens. And it seemed fairly easy for him to carry it out. And then, of course, came 9/11. But this was aimed at people who work for our government. And children today need to know that story.
I've gone to the schools before, and it's kind of interesting to see all these children. None of them were even thought of when the bombing happened. And it's really interesting how they're handled. They're taught that a bad man did something very bad. And you know, you think of everything that happened down here that day, and it's all put into one little sentence.
I try to talk to them on terms that they understand. We talk about making choices and decisions, and not meeting violence with violence, and being kind and soothing and healing.
I've had students who were very much survivors, nieces, nephews. You know, they experienced it when they were little because they were just tiny babies, but they experienced it and they hear it yearly. So, you know, it's rough. You have to be it's a delicate balance between telling them the truth, presenting them the information, and keeping their emotions in check. Because some kids get angry, some kids get real sad.
It is hard to not feel robbed, which we do. I mean, we feel like this amazing person in our lives was taken from us before we had a chance to get to know her. But you have to feel grateful at the same time because she was such an amazing person, and I feel like I still have this relationship with her. You know, like hearing stories about how much she loved being an aunt to us and how much she loved us we have no doubt of that, even though we probably couldn't. I know personally I can't recall any memories that I have, but she's still there.
A lot of students my peers would ask me questions about her. The main one is, do I remember anything? Or why were there cameras here at TV talking to you or something like that? And I just I tell them it's from the bombing, and they're asking me how I'm doing and stuff like that. And other than that, I really couldn't give you more of an answer. I could tell them I was the youngest in the bombing, but other than that, I wouldn't really go further into detail or really want to.
Some of the questions that they have is, Ms. Imes, what really did happen? And that's kind of hard as a teacher because I don't know a lot of times what the boundaries that their parents want us to stay. So as a teacher, I need to educate them, but I also need to be respectful of their parents' wishes.
I think that's the hardest thing to explain. Why would someone do that? You know, and there's no answer. You know, people do things that are unexplainable.
I learned a long time ago, I don't know the why. So up front, a lot of people say why, and I confirm the fact we don't know the why. And that's part of our dilemma, and that's part of our grief.
Oh, I don't think you ever move beyond why. I mean, I don't move beyond why why things still happen. When you think of violence, and I mean now you see things so differently, but I see things so differently.
They need to learn from the mistakes that others make so that we don't do that again. It is important, especially when there's been a loss of life and so close to home. I think that it's something that it's part of us, whether they were here or not. It is part of us as Oklahomans, and we need to honor them. And so we need to teach our kids, you know, we're not going to act on violence.
10, 9,
The Kids Marathon helps me because I'm able to start something positive with them, something we talk about making decisions, making healthy choices all year long. And then when April comes, then that's when we start as a school kind of talking about the bombing and the memorial and why we run and why we remember this tragedy that happened. And so it's kind of been a gateway that we can use all year long, but specifically in April, then I'm able to kind of say, okay, here's what happened, and here's how we can remember and celebrate life.
The significance of the marathon is that it's a race. It's a test of endurance. So just much like what this city's been through over the past 2 decades, and much like what is you train and you run and you're injured, you get back up, you keep moving. That's what we feel like we've gone through as Oklahomans over the past 20 years. Something we spend a lot of time on. It's a fun day for the city, a great way to remember, but to also celebrate lives. And I think it's been remarkable to watch people come from all 50 states and numerous countries every year, the last Sunday in April. And as they've come over the last 15 years, I've also seen our city change. So it's been a nice, I think, a celebration of life.
Here's to the runners.
Here's to the runners.
Here's to the supporters.
Yay.
Here's to the family and friends and remembering why we're here each year.
And here's to Susie. Here's to who is.
The marathon. You know, there's never a chance that we'd ever forget Susie, of course. But it's a wonderful opportunity every year to remember her in a more happy vein, with family and all around us, with people who are all participating. It doesn't matter what you do, if you run the marathon or do the 5K or just go down there and cheer people on. You're all part of this thing together, and you're kind of there for one reason together, and it's really inspiring.
I was just overwhelmed with the quantity of people there and how big of a following it has, and how many people would be walking in remembrance of someone that they had found in a book and found some connection with, and they had no other connection other than that they read their story.
With marathons come tradition. The runners are creatures of habit. They're things they like to do, but some neat things have come out of the race where runners will spend a year training and receive their medal at the finish line and walk over and place it on a chair, or they'll run with the name on in honor of or in memory of. And that's very nice to see along the course, to start to see the 168 names. You see their banners around the course all over town. I think that's something the families have been appreciated, and the runners all say it's inspiring. It keeps them going as they move forward.
It's a wonderful way to support the memorial, to celebrate life, to celebrate the lives of those who were lost, to celebrate the lives of those who survived, those who responded, those who helped in any way, those who helped create the memorial.
The kids get on the bus and they are on their cell phones, going nuts, screaming, that sort of thing. And then once they get to the memorial, they completely change. They change, their demeanors change. Like they act more mature. Their maturity level goes up because you can tell that they're being respectful. I think the essay contest allows them to kind of connect all of it together, the Hope Trunk and what happened, and then going to the museum and actually seeing where it happened and seeing how serene and quiet and calm the place is. And then they get to kind of guess their thoughts and feelings about it after they've learned more about it. A lot of them come in not knowing anything about it. So it really helps to do kind of the whole unit.
So I want to capture different concepts, how it was awful, it was terrible, and it blossomed into hope, and the fence brought lots of hope and healing to the people, the victims, the families. It gave them a feeling of that we understand, we're with you, we sympathize, we empathize. And it helped in the long run.
None of us were alive during this, but we've heard so much about it, and being able to physically be there, we can really understand the impact it had on our community.
I get really emotional very easily, and it really hit me hard, and it was really hard to come back. So I tried to think of, I watched a lot of the survivor stories and saw how they came back and tried to go from there.
Memorials carry messages of hope, healing, and warning for the present and future generations. Throughout the history of mankind, the world has seen immense tragedy, caused by few but suffered by the mass population. Such events envelop people in a sea of pain, loss, and helplessness. A few brave come out to help others emerge from their depression and to leave a message for the coming generations.
As you walk up to the fence, you can just feel the emotion. Each and every item has their own personal story that can only truly be understood by the person who put it there.
The acts of terror are supposed to tear us apart, but instead they bring us together. It is best phrased in the words of our great country's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one.
I really do not like going in there. I mean, it just brings back horrible memories for me. What you saw was so horrifying and so sad. You know, I fortunately didn't see the children. I only saw the adults, or a lot of the adults. But when I was there several years ago with some people from the East. They were here for the Cowboy Hall Western Heritage Prix de West show, and they wanted to see the memorial. And I really had not been there for years. And I said, well, I'll take you. So we went through the museum. When you leave, if you recall, there are little memorials and mementos of each one of the people who were killed. And I remember seeing there a young Marine officer in his uniform, and I just broke out crying because I remembered there at the site, you could see a Marine officer's leg with a polished black shoe between two big pieces of concrete. And I thought, my twin brother was a Marine, and I said, that's a Marine officer, probably the recruiter, and that's who the guy was. Well, it had been buried in my mind until years, probably 12, 13, 14 years later, 15 years later, I saw his face. I'd never seen his face because I'd never gone into that part of the museum. I just didn't want to.
Those sad, tough memories are easy to kind of push away and push back. I mean, I think we probably do that, but it's to take the time when you're ready to walk, back down those paths, I think can be pretty therapeutic and healing.
When you get through, you realize that this beautiful, sacred place down there that is so well visited and everything has brought out the strength that Oklahoma has, and what happened here in Oklahoma City.
It's important for us to only go there. It's important to me, and I think all of us, to be there when it happened. It's hard to go, but that's just the way we're wired, and I certainly understand those who can't go. I do. I understand that completely and respect that.
I think it is a peaceful place. I think they did it well. Even though it is a pretty place now, I still have visions of that day, even when I'm not standing here talking about it.
Yeah, this is Scott. Oh, Colton and Chase. Jeez. You look at those little chairs, and those get me every time. All of them do, and I look through, and I still go through, and I look at the names, and when I see the names on the chairs, it does make me think of their families. It makes me think of those people that I've met since, who talked about times at the dinner table or times at the lake or things like that.
There have been multiple times where when I was going to school and
in the city that my girlfriend at the time, wife now, we went down a couple times because since she was from Minnesota, you know, she knew of the memorial, she knew of the happenings, but she really just didn't know about everything. And when she went to that memorial and she saw it, you know, she was just in awe. Her jaw just dropped, you know, just kind of, you know, it was kind of a bittersweet ordeal of amazement and, you know, complete and utter fear of this happening and how this could happen and how this could make people who were affiliated with those people feel still today.
I think one of the real big attributes of our organization is understanding that we were joining a community, and it was incumbent on us as a group of people to understand the history of where we were arriving to. And I think once you walk the grounds and once you understand the story and not only the event but also the recovery, the establishment of the standard, I think that helps connect the dots as to why working here or playing here is really a real blessing. It's a real opportunity. So I think developing that idea was pretty natural. But you know, in order to make progress, I think you have to understand heritage and understand history, and our hope is that everybody understands that.
I think Oklahoma City showed, without regard to race, color, sex, or nationality, when something bad happened, people were there without regard to their own personal safety to help others. And I think that was a wonderful lesson in civic responsibility and civic maturity.
My sense of Oklahomans is that when something horrific happens, whether it be the tornadoes in Moore that recently happened or the Murrah building bombing, we tend to lay down our differences and say, I'm jumping in to help. And I don't know if that happens in every community. You know, the tornadoes in Joplin, Missouri, you heard about you know, that same kind of feel, you know, happening. And but I think Oklahomans just have this real sense of being able to say, I'm going to set my differences aside. I'm going to work really hard. I'm not going to ask, you know, are you a Christian or are you a Muslim or are you Buddhist? You know, before I help you, I'm going to help. And those conversations can be left to other aspects of our time together and our culture and our society. Oklahomans have a unique way of being able to do that. And that's something that I think we need to teach to others and share.
To me, closure means you're right back to where you started, as if it never happened. There is no closure. You just keep on living and just learn how to put it in its place in order to keep going. And that's what you do.
I think it's like someone who loses a limb. I think that limb is forever gone. You just learn to live without it. In a case like this, you're stuck with the images of that day, regardless of what they were. You're stuck with them, and you get to choose how you live your life with those images in your head. They're always going to be there. You don't find closure to it. How do you find closure to, you know, children being murdered or that number of people being murdered? It's just something you learn to live with.
We didn't take a step back. We just kept moving forward. It doesn't mean you forget. Obviously, it doesn't mean you forget, but you remember with dignity and you carry it forward.
I think the bombing in some aspect brought the city to the limelight on a national level, and then that the media attention kind of turned towards, well, what is the industry of Oklahoma and what is Oklahoma City all about, which I think has helped our economic growth, and the city has come alive in a number of different ways.
I hope we never become numb to it, that it is something that we just accept. Because, you know, it's, look at the effects. I mean, we're 20 years removed from this one, and look at the effects today.
We were the first, but we're not the last. I think I want them to take away that they have to be aware of their surroundings, and that not all terrorists are from foreign countries, that they can be right here with us, just like the one in Oklahoma City.
What we don't want is these 168 names to have died in vain. Those families will tell you, if this place weren't here, if this story wasn't being told, 20 years later it could likely be forgotten. I mean, there are a lot of things we can't remember 20 years ago. And so what made this story so significant? Mainly because it changed how we live, what we do, what we have access to. But more importantly, it's to keep those memories alive. And so places like the Memorial and Museum are learning labs to not just to remember, but to make life changes and to walk through here and realize there's a point that we all can, something we can all do. If it's running in the marathon, if it's helping your friend, if it's raking their leaves, if it's something that we all know we can make a difference in someone's life, we should be challenged to do it. And I hope when you leave here, the legacy is that you've made a decision to be a better person in some way. Whatever area you feel like you need to change, that you've made that decision to do that here.
I really feel like the trait of recovery is like really, really important for a group of people, because you know, success is not like a linear path, and you're going to be dealt so many different things, but the city has demonstrated that they can recover, that they can gather. They may get, you know, the progress may get stunted for a moment, but that there's this great understanding that resiliency is about absorbing, gathering, recovering, and having influence over your future. And I think those are great traits for any community, because if you have that mentality, I think you can handle a lot of things